Hello students, I'm Imkong Tunlapungan, an anthropologist from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today we will be discussing on the module Ongoing Evolution in Man, Are We Still Evolving? From the paper Human Origin and Evolution. Well, the learning objectives of the module are to comprehend the difficulties of measurement of evolution, to understand the factors impacting evolutionary process in modern population, to know about recent examples of ongoing evolution, and to understand the barriers of natural selection. Well, evolution is often perceived as a slow process which requires thousands or millions of years. During the last few decades, a common consensus has been generated by world's preeminent biologists that human evolution is over. It is often claimed that evolutionary process in modern humans have ceased because cultural and technological advancements have annihilated natural selection. Since modern Homo sapiens emerged 50,000 years ago, natural selection has almost become irrelevant to us. The influential Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould proclaimed, "There have been no biological changes. Everything we have called culture and civilization were built with the same body and brain." In contrast, recent studies show that selection can be strong in contemporary populations. Growing genomic evolution supports that microevolution, defined as a genetic change from one generation to the next in response to natural selection, can lead to changes in the phenotypes, that is, the observable characters of organisms over just a few years or decades. This likely applies to humans as well because natural selection operates on several morphological, physiological, and life history traits in modern societies through differential reproduction or survival. And a number of these genetic traits present variations attesting the potential for a microevolutionary response to selection. According to Henry Harpending, it is likely that human races are evolving away from each other and we are getting less alike, not merging into a single mixed humanity. Harpending theorizes that the attitudes and customs that distinguish today's humans from those of the past may be more than just cultural, as historians have widely assumed. He says that we aren't the same as people even 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Almost every trait you look at is under strong genetic influence. Now, the difficulties in measurement of evolution. The measurement of evolution in a population is beset with many technical problems. The main difficulties which are involved in the measurement of evolution are as follows. First, evolution requires information on phenotype, pedigree links, and fitness over a sufficient number of generations, which is rarely available. Humans are slow reproducing species with generation times of about 20 years or more. It is therefore difficult to observe intergenerational evolutionary change. Only 2 reproductive generations have passed since the discovery of the structure of DNA. Second, robustly demonstrating a response to selection is challenging. Typically, phenotypic trends observed in populations are compared with evolutionary predictions based on selection and heritability estimates, for example, using the breeder's equation. Third, selection measured at the phenotypic level does not necessarily imply a causal relationship between the trait and fitness, and as a consequence, such predictions will often be inappropriate in the case of natural populations. This also implies that phenotypic changes, even those occurring in the predicted direction, may not provide robust evidence of evolution, as they may not be indicative of underlying genetic trends. Now, these problems are likely exacerbated in long-lived species such as humans, where within individual plastic responses to environmental variation or variability selection can drive phenotypic changes over the time scale of a study in the same direction as that predicted for genetic responses to selection. The role of demographic transition in influencing evolutionary process in modern human population. The demographic transition is one major step in the history of modern human populations that impact evolutionary processes. It typically begins with a sharp decrease in mortality arising from technological and societal improvements in living conditions such as hygiene, disease prevention, and healthcare, followed by a decrease in fertility. Typically, this causes population size to grow, then to stabilize or even decline towards the end of the transition. Here, figure 1 shows how contemporary evolution interacts with the demographic transition. This figure illustrates the schematic view of the dynamics between a demographic transition and evolutionary forces. The demographic transition is a change in vital rates, that is, in age-specific fertility and mortality, which is shown in the bottom graph, driven by environmental changes in modernizing societies, often with a transient increase in population growth rate due to the typical delay in fertility decline relative to mortality. This has two effects on the natural selection. First, demographic changes per se alter the variance in relative fitness, that is, the opportunity for selection. Second, the latter, as well as environmental changes per se, may modify the covariance between phenotype and fitness, that is, the strength of the selection. Now let us discuss signs of ongoing evolution. During last few decades, a team of researchers found an abundance of recent adaptive mutations etched in the human genome. Even more shocking, these mutations seem to be piling up faster and faster, like an avalanche. Over the past 10,000 years, their data show human evolution has occurred 100 times more quickly than in any other period in our species' history. Geneticists have identified more than 2,000 genes that appear to have come under selective pressures since the rise of Homo, and several of them may still be subject to such pressures today. Some of these favored alleles apparently arose at highly critical periods in human evolution. Such is the case of FOXP2, the so-called speech gene, which is implicated in the ability to talk, shows signs of strong selection and arose no more than 200,000 years ago, coinciding closely with the first appearance of Homo sapiens. Other genes under selection are linked to cognition and behavior, and still others are involved in defense against diseases such as hypertension, malaria, and AIDS. The new genetic adaptations, some 2,000 in total, are not limited to the well-recognized differences among ethnic groups in superficial traits such as the skin and eye color. The mutations relate to the brain, the digestive system, lifespan, immunity to pathogens, sperm production, and bones. In short, virtually every aspect of our functioning. Now, following examples clearly show the signs of ongoing evolution. There is growing evidence that epidemics are exerting selective pressure on our species. New methods for studying genetic variability, which can be used to study long-lived species with long generation times, have demonstrated directional natural selection on human genes by looking for signatures of selection in the genes of the present population. These include the glucose-6-phosphate dehydrogenase gene, which confers resistance to malaria, and the chemokine receptor, that is 5-CCR5 among Europeans, which confers resistance to the human immunodeficiency virus. The latter is likely to have evolved within the past 2,000 years in response to an infectious agent that uses the CCR5 receptor to infect the host cells. Numerous other studies have also provided evidence for recent natural selection on the human genome through comparisons of large sections of DNA. Now, another most incendiary aspect of the fast evolution research is evidence that the brain may be evolving just as quickly as the rest of the body. Stronger evidence that natural selection has continued to shape the brain in recent epochs comes from studies of DRD4, a mutation in a neurotransmitter receptor that is linked to attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder. Now, children diagnosed with this attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder are twice as likely to carry the variant gene as those without the diagnosis. The RD4 makes a receptor in the brain less effective in pointing to dopamine, is often helpful in treating this problem. Children with the mutation tend to be more restless than other youngsters and score higher on tests of novelty seeking and risk taking, all traits that might have pushed to those with the variant to explore new frontiers. Sequencing studies suggest that the RD4 mutation arose 50,000 years ago, just as humans were spreading out of Africa. Its prevalence tends to increase the farther a population is from Africa, leading some investigators to dub it the migratory gene. At least one allele, or say the copy of the gene, is carried by 80% of some South American populations. In contrast, the allele is present in 40% of indigenous populations living farther north in the America and in just 20% of Europeans and Africans. Our exodus out of Africa paved the way for one of the most obvious markers of race, skin hue. People with dark skin have trouble manufacturing vitamin D from ultraviolet radiation in northern latitudes, which makes them more susceptible to serious bone deformities. Consequently, Europeans and Asians over the last 20,000 years evolved lighter skin through 2,000 different mutations that decrease the production of the skin pigment melanin. Similarly, the gene for blue eyes codes for paler skin coloring in many vertebrates and hence might have piggybacked along with lighter skin. Clearly, something made blue eyes evolutionarily advantageous in some environments, and it is well-known fact that 10,000 years ago no one had blue eyes on Earth. This figure shows the recent examples of selection in humans. It is also claimed that human sperms may also be evolving at high speed driven by the race to get to the egg before another man's sperm. In the modernized cities, there is a fiercer competition among sexual partners because sperm can fertilize an egg up to 24 hours after being ejaculated in the vagina. A woman who copulates with 2 or more partners in close succession is setting up the very conditions that pit one man's sperm against another's. According to John D. Hawkes, sperm today is very different from sperm even 5,000 years ago. Newly selected mutations in genes controlling sperm production show up in every ethnic group. The selection for such kind of super sperm provides further corroboration that our species is not particularly monogamous, a view widely shared by other anthropologists. Other examples of agriculture and domestication mediated human evolution. There are some examples of human evolution that occurred subsequent to the invention of agriculture and that involved the co-evolution of cultural and genetic systems with changes in the subsistence strategies. The example that is most often cited is the natural selection of heterozygous carriers of the sickle cell gene to maintain sickle cell anemia in populations that are exposed to malaria. The disease of malaria is about 35,000 years old, with the most lethal form of it just 5,000 years old. Yet in sub-Saharan Africa and other regions where it is endemic, people have already developed 25 new genes that protect against malaria, including the Duffy blood type, an entirely new blood group. This natural selection is particularly visible in regions of Central Africa where tropical forests have been cleared for agriculture, which in turn has caused the proliferation of mosquitoes that transfer the malaria-causing Plasmodium parasite. Now, another example of more recent evolution within the human genome is provided by the evidence for strong natural selection on the gene that controls lactase production. Once people began keeping cattle herds, it became an advantage to derive nutrient calories from milk throughout life rather than only as an infant or toddler suckling at its mother's breast. A mutation that arose 8,000 years ago in Northern Europe allowed adults to digest lactose, that is, the main sugar in milk, and it propagated rapidly, allowing the rise of the modern dairy industry. Today, the gene for lactose digestion is present in 80% of Europeans, but in just 20% of Asians and Africans. As agriculture became established and started creating a reliable food supply, more men and women would have begun living into their 40s and beyond, jump-starting the selection pressure for increased lifespan. Robert Moisey is currently performing a genetic analysis of men and women in their 90s who are of European ancestry. He has traced many early onset forms of cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's to older human gene variants. According to him, people with more modern variants tend to have greater resistance to these chronic illnesses of old age and should be overrepresented in the age 90+ population. These examples clearly demonstrate that natural selection has recently acted upon humans after the origin of agriculture and the domestication of animals and independently among different populations. Now let us discuss the cultural and technological adaptations of modern life and how there are barriers to natural selection. According to many scholars, humans are no longer subjected to the random mechanisms of variation and selection, and as a species, they are dependent on culture and technology for survival. In this respect, humans have been regarded as a species so dependent on culture and technology that cultural adaptation has replaced biological adaptation. During the past 12,000 years, humans have increasingly used culture and technology built upon agriculture and animal domestication to control and modify the natural environment. Therefore, culture has an important role in understanding whether evolution is still influencing the biology of our species. This figure depicts the model of the relationship between the environment and human adaptation, which is according to Stock, 2008. Now, culture and technology were clearly crucial to the successful colonization of the world by our species. They allowed us to occupy most regions of the planet through the use of fire, housing, watercraft, versatile tools, and cognition, which enormously improved our ability to hunt and forage for food in markedly different environments, and in the process to occupy more environmental niches than most other species. Since the origin of agriculture, the rate of technological progress has increased exponentially. Agriculture originated independently within the past 12,000 years in various parts of the world, and the surplus of food resulting from agriculture has allowed people to specialize in different tasks and has provided greater scope for innovation and cultural transmission. The technological achievements of our contemporary and industrialized society still rest on our agricultural production system and the effective distribution of food resources. In turn, these technologies allow us to modify our environment so effectively that many have argued that we have removed our species from nature. Gene frequencies might still change over time through random factors such as genetic drift, but if our culture effectively removes us from the environmental stress, then natural selection will no longer occur. However, it is important to remember that our ability to adapt to environmental stress is contingent on the availability and distribution of resources and energy. Regarding another tier of environmental buffering, there is evidence that humans have physiological characteristics that allow them to adapt efficiently to different or changing environments. The ability to cook food provides humans with a greater dietary flexibility than the chimpanzees, gorillas, or orangutans. This dietary flexibility and the extensive use of meat have allowed humans to converge on a common adaptive niche and to survive in a greater range of environments. Humans also show greater flexibility in growth and have larger stores of body fat than many other species, both of which increase our ability to survive short-term environmental fluctuations. Humans have greater variation in fertility and birth spacing, which allows populations to bounce back quickly after periods of high mortality. And there is increasing evidence that environmental conditions can alter the regulation of specific genes. All of these physiological features allow us to respond to environmental stress without the need for genetic adaptation by natural selection. Now, considering the strong evidence that our species has a greater range of both technological and physiological mechanisms for buffering the effects of environmental stress, One could argue that genetic evolution is no longer influencing our species. However, it is clear that most of our non-genetic methods for mitigating environmental stress depend on our access to the resources provided by agriculture. As a result, this means of environmental buffering might not be sufficient in all circumstances. Now let us summarize this module. To many researchers, the limited but growing evidence that natural selection is currently acting on the human genome means that humans are still evolving, even if in subtle ways. Whether or not these patterns will make a significant difference in the way humans look or live is another question. According to Ian Tattersall, an anthropologist of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, there will be minor fluctuations over time and space in the makeup of local human gene pools as humans respond to local conditions, but they won't be directional. He says that he finds it hard to foresee that under current conditions, a qualitatively new kind of human is ever likely to emerge, but if conditions change, all bets are off. Well, evolutionary predictions are tied to speculation about just what kind of environment humans may face. Some researchers suggest that changing climate conditions may diminish the benefits of culture and medicine, creating a new era of natural selection. There has been a relaxation in selective pressures in industrialized societies, says evolutionary geneticist Peter Catley of the University of Edinburgh, UK. But our ability to sustain that relaxation is probably temporary. We are using up our energy resources, our population is growing, and the climate is changing. All this is bound to lead to greater difficulties and renewed selective pressures. Despite such concerns, however, most scientists remain leery of long-term forecasts, in part because of the way evolution works. Evolution is not directed towards a goal, says Tyler Smith. It always takes the short-term view, operating just on what allows us to survive and reproduce better in this generation. For now, predicting humanity's evolutionary future may be little more than crystal ball gazing, better suited to science fiction than scientific research. The accuracy of forecasts, for instance, those pertaining to demography or epidemiology and on which public policy may rely, could well depend on our knowledge of contemporary evolution. The evolutionary potential of modern humans has major implications. First, it signifies that we should consider the role of evolutionary processes that might underlie any observed trends in phenotypes. Second, it may produce eco-evolutionary feedbacks modifying the dynamics of modern populations. Not surprisingly, the new findings have raised hackles. Some scientists are alarmed by claims of ethnic differences in temperament and intelligence, fearing that they will inflame racial sensitivities. Other researchers point to limitations in the data, yet even skeptics now admit that some human traits at least are evolving rapidly, challenging yesterday's hallowed beliefs. That's all for this module. Thank you so much for listening.